To the old lady who's finally going to stop hoarding all that money and start helping the family properly, my daughter-in-law said, raising her champagne glass while 20 people sat frozen around the table pretending not to hear the cruelty hidden beneath her smile. I smiled back anyway. That was the moment I realized my family had already buried me long before I was actually gone. I'm Helen Whitmore. I'm 71 years old, and until my grandson Ethan's 10th birthday lunch, I truly believed love and sacrifice guaranteed respect in the end. The restaurant overlooked Lake Harmony, one of those expensive waterfront places with white tablecloths, polished silverware, and servers who spoke softly enough to make everyone feel important. Vanessa had chosen it herself. Of course she had. My daughter-in-law loved places that looked expensive in photographs. The private dining room smelled faintly of roses and grilled salmon. Sunlight spilled through the tall windows and reflected against crystal glasses arranged perfectly around the long table. Ethan sat near the center wearing a blue blazer that made him look older than 10. He smiled when he saw me walk in earlier that afternoon. Real smiles were rare in that family now. "Grandma," he had shouted before Vanessa reminded him to lower his voice because this wasn't a playground. I handed him the wrapped baseball glove I'd spent 3 weeks searching for. Genuine leather. His favorite team stitched carefully across the side. His eyes lit up the way Daniel's used to when he was little. For a moment, I forgot everything else. I forgot the distance. I forgot the silence during phone calls. I forgot how every family gathering lately felt like arriving somewhere I was no longer welcome. Then Vanessa stood for the toast. She wore cream-colored silk and diamond earrings Daniel definitely couldn't afford on his own. Her blonde hair fell perfectly over one shoulder while she smiled around the room like a woman accepting an award. "Family means supporting each other," she began sweetly, lightly tapping her fork against the champagne glass. "And speaking of support, I think we should all raise a glass to Helen." A few people smiled politely. Daniel looked down at his plate immediately. That should have warned me. To the old lady who's finally going to stop hoarding all that money and start helping the family properly. A few nervous laughs escaped around the table. Quiet ones. Embarrassed ones. Vanessa laughed louder to fill the silence. "I mean, honestly, Ethan deserves a bigger backyard before high school, right?" My fingers tightened gently around my water glass. I could hear the soft clink of ice shifting inside it. Across from me, Daniel still refused to look up. My own son, 42 years old, and suddenly fascinated by the grilled asparagus on his plate. I kept my smile in place because women my age learn something important after enough disappointment. The person who stays calm controls the room. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. "Oh, come on, Helen. Don't look so shocked. We're family." Family. Such a dangerous word when spoken by people who only use it right before asking for something. Ethan looked confused. Olivia, my 17-year-old granddaughter, stared directly at Vanessa with open disgust before lowering her eyes quickly. The waiter entered carrying the birthday cake at exactly the wrong moment. Everyone clapped too loudly, grateful for the interruption. Vanessa sat down beside Daniel, satisfied with herself, while conversation slowly returned around the table like cautious rain after thunder. I reached for my purse quietly and touched the envelope hidden inside it. The envelope my late husband's attorney had mailed me 3 weeks earlier with a note that simply read, "In case they ever show you who they truly are." At the time, I thought the warning was unnecessary. Sitting there beneath the soft restaurant lights while my daughter-in-law smiled across the table like a woman already spending money that didn't belong to her, I realized Arthur Whitmore had understood our family far better than I ever did. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though the restaurant was only 20 minutes from my house. I kept both hands steady on the steering wheel while the late afternoon sun flashed through the trees lining Route 9. The silence inside the car pressed against me harder than Vanessa's words had. Cruelty from strangers is easy to understand. Cruelty from family arrives quietly. It sits beside you like someone familiar wearing a different face. When I pulled into my driveway, the house greeted me the same way it always had. Large white columns. Blue shutters. Arthur painted himself 15 summers ago. The flower beds near the porch already beginning to fade with early October weather. I stayed in the car for another minute before stepping out because for the first time since Arthur died, the house no longer felt peaceful. It felt watched, as if every room already belonged to someone else in their imagination. Inside, The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked softly through the silence. I placed my purse carefully on the kitchen counter and removed my earrings one at a time. Small habits. Quiet habits. The kind that survive even after entire marriages disappear. I opened the refrigerator and stared at the casserole dish I had prepared the night before for Ethan's birthday dinner. Vanessa had changed the reservation last minute and never told me. I had spent 2 hours cooking anyway. The foil still covered the dish untouched. Arthur used to say people revealed themselves most clearly in small acts of consideration. Returning calls. Saving a seat. Remembering preferences. Vanessa forgot things strategically. Daniel followed along because it was easier than disagreeing with her. I understood that now. I poured myself a cup of coffee, even though it was almost 6 o'clock. The kitchen window overlooked the lake behind the property. Arthur loved that view. Every morning for 38 years, he sat at the same spot reading newspapers while steam rose from his coffee mug. Sometimes I still caught myself listening for the sound of pages turning. Grief changes shape with age. It becomes quieter, more patient. I carried my coffee into the study and opened the drawer of Arthur's old mahogany desk. The envelope was still there beneath a stack of insurance papers. Thick, cream-colored paper with my name written in Arthur's handwriting across the front. Helen. Just Helen. No fancy notes. No dramatic warning. My fingers rested against it for a moment before I finally opened it again. Inside were copies of legal documents from the family trust along with a handwritten letter dated 8 months before Arthur passed away. I had only skimmed it the first time because the pain of seeing his handwriting felt unbearable then. Tonight was different. Tonight, I read every word slowly. If you are reading this, it means Vanessa has finally shown her hand, he wrote. I warned Daniel for years that kindness without boundaries attracts the wrong people. He never listened. I sat down heavily in Arthur's leather chair. Outside, wind moved softly through the trees near the water. The house creaked once, settling against the cold. Arthur had underlined one sentence near the bottom of the page. Do not let guilt decide your future. They will count on that. I closed my eyes briefly. Suddenly, dozens of moments from the past 3 years returned all at once. Vanessa insisting I did not need a key to their new house. Daniel asking strange questions about property taxes. Conversations stopping whenever I entered a room. Last Christmas, Vanessa joking that older people should simplify their lives before things became messy for the family later. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things because decent mothers do not want to believe their children see them as obstacles. But tonight, something inside me shifted quietly into place. Not anger. Not revenge. Clarity. Cold and sharp as winter lake water. Then my phone vibrated against the desk. Olivia's name appeared on the screen. I answered on the third ring because Olivia never called me directly unless something was wrong. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear voices in the background on her end, dishes clattering softly, a television somewhere in the house. Then a door closed and the noise disappeared. Grandma, she asked quietly, are you home? I looked around the study, even though she could not see me. Arthur's reading glasses still rested beside the lamp exactly where he had left them before his final hospital visit. Yes, I said. I am home. Olivia exhaled shakily. I am sorry about today. I leaned back slowly in the leather chair. You do not need to apologize for your mother. Another silence followed. Heavy this time. Careful. Grandma, she whispered. I think you need to be careful. Those words settled into the room like cold air through an open window. Outside, the last light of evening disappeared behind the lake. I stood and walked toward the kitchen while holding the phone close against my ear. Tell me what happened, I said calmly. I heard hesitation in her breathing. Olivia had always been thoughtful, even as a little girl. She was the kind of child who noticed when someone looked tired at dinner or when a cashier seemed upset. Vanessa called her sensitive like it was a weakness. Arthur used to call it character. After the party, Olivia finally said, Mom and Dad stayed behind with Uncle Scott near the bar. My hand tightened slightly around the edge of the kitchen counter. They thought everyone had left. I said nothing. Sometimes silence invites truth better than questions. Dad said the lake house will probably sell for over $2 million now because property values went up again. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. Then Mom laughed and said once you finally signed the paperwork, they could renovate the new place before next summer. I closed my eyes slowly. The refrigerator hummed softly behind me. Somewhere upstairs a floorboard shifted as the old house settled for the night. What paperwork? I asked carefully. I do not know. Olivia sounded frustrated now. But Grandma, Mom keeps talking about assisted living communities and simplifying your life. She has brochures all over the kitchen counter lately. Assisted living. Simplifying. Such polished words for removing someone quietly from their own life. I walked toward the sink and stared out the dark kitchen window. My reflection looked older tonight. Sharper somehow. Did your father say anything else? Olivia lowered her voice even more. He asked if the realtor thought the property would look better after some updates. Then Mom said none of it mattered because you were too emotional after Grandpa died to understand finances anymore. For a few seconds I could not speak. Not because I was hurt. Hurt had already passed. Through me earlier that afternoon beside the birthday cake and champagne glasses. This feeling was different. Clearer. Like finally seeing the full shape of something standing in the fog. Grandma, Olivia asked nervously, are you okay? I opened the cabinet beside the sink and removed one of Arthur's old coffee mugs. White ceramic with tiny blue sailboats around the rim. His favorite. I am fine, I answered softly. And strangely enough, it was true. Because for months I had blamed myself for the distance growing inside this family. I thought grief had changed me. Made me difficult. Slower. Easier to dismiss. But standing there in the quiet kitchen while Olivia whispered fears she should never have carried at 17 years old, I finally understood something important. They were not waiting for me to recover from losing Arthur. They were waiting for me to become weak enough to surrender everything he spent his life protecting. Olivia's voice trembled slightly. Please do not tell Mom I called. I will not, I promised. And Olivia? Yes. I looked toward the study where Arthur's letter still rested open on the desk beneath the warm lamplight. Thank you for telling me the truth. After we hung up, I remained motionless in the kitchen for a long time listening to the grandfather clock echo through the empty house. Then I picked up the envelope again and noticed something I had missed before. Tucked behind the trust documents was a business card with one name printed neatly across the front. Margaret Holloway, family attorney. Margaret Holloway's office sat on the third floor of an old brick building downtown beside the courthouse. Arthur used to joke smelled permanently like coffee and bad decisions. I arrived 10 minutes early the next morning wearing the navy wool coat Arthur bought me for our 30th anniversary. The air outside carried that sharp October chill that settles into your bones before winter fully arrives. Downtown Lake Harmony looked exactly the same as it had 20 years ago. Small bookstore on the corner. Flower shop beside the bank. Men in heavy jackets carrying paper cups across the street before work. Strange how entire towns remain steady while families quietly fall apart behind closed doors. Margaret greeted me personally when I stepped into her office. She was probably in her late 60s now, silver-haired and elegant in the way women become after decades of surviving difficult people professionally. Helen, she said softly, holding both my hands for a moment. I was wondering when you would finally come see me. Those words lingered in my mind as she led me into her office overlooking Main Street. Everything smelled faintly of leather books and cedarwood. Arthur trusted very few people completely. Margaret Holloway had been one of them. I sat carefully across from her desk while she poured coffee into 2 white porcelain cups. Neither of us spoke immediately. She studied me quietly for a moment before saying, Arthur prepared for this possibility more thoroughly than you realize. I looked down at the envelope resting in my lap. You knew? Margaret folded her hands together. Arthur noticed changes in Daniel after the wedding. Mostly financial behavior. Questions about ownership structures. Trust access. Property transfers. I stared at the steam rising slowly from my coffee. Daniel had once cried at age 8 because he accidentally stepped on a bird's nest in our backyard. He used to bring me dandelions wrapped in napkins from the school playground. Mothers spend years memorizing soft versions of their children. Sometimes we fail to notice when harder versions replace them. Margaret opened a thick file drawer beside her desk and removed several folders marked Whitmore Family Trust. Arthur legally protected the lake house, the investment accounts, and most major assets before his illness worsened. My eyes lifted immediately. Protected them from who? Margaret's expression did not change. Anyone attempting to pressure you into financial decisions while emotionally vulnerable. The room became very still after that. Outside the office window, traffic moved slowly through the intersection below. A delivery truck stopped beside the bakery across the street. Ordinary life continuing while mine quietly rearranged itself sentence by sentence. Has Daniel contacted you? I asked. Margaret gave a small nod. Twice after Arthur's funeral. Once again 3 months ago. My stomach tightened slightly. What did he want? She opened one folder carefully and slid a document toward me. He requested information regarding expedited property transfers and cognitive competency procedures related to elderly asset management. I read the sentence twice before the meaning fully settled over me. Cognitive competency, elderly asset management. Legal language polished smooth enough to hide the ugliness underneath. He wanted to prove I could not manage my own finances, I said quietly. Margaret did not soften the truth. He wanted options. I leaned back slowly in the chair. For a moment, I remembered Vanessa standing beside the birthday cake, smiling with perfect teeth while joking about my money in front of strangers. Not impulsive cruelty. Not careless humor. Confidence. The confidence of people already planning ownership. Margaret slid another paper across the desk toward me. Arthur created something called a survivorship clause shortly before his passing. If any beneficiary attempts coercion, manipulation, or financial pressure against you, they forfeit their inheritance rights immediately. I looked up sharply. Arthur did that. Yes. For the first time since entering the office, Margaret smiled faintly. Your husband loved you very much, Helen. Enough to understand exactly who might someday mistake your kindness for weakness. I lowered my eyes to the documents resting between us. Suddenly Vanessa's champagne toast sounded less like humiliation and more like a mistake they did not yet realize they had made. The strange thing about betrayal is how ordinary life continues while your understanding of it collapses quietly underneath your feet. The next few days moved with almost unbearable normalcy. Leaves drifted across my driveway every morning. The mail arrived at exactly 11:30. The grocery store cashier still asked whether I wanted paper or plastic bags. Meanwhile, I carried the knowledge that my own son had explored legal ways to take control of my life while pretending to worry about my well-being. By Thursday afternoon, Vanessa called me for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Her voice arrived bright and polished through the phone speaker. Helen, we have all been talking, and we think you should come over Sunday night for dinner. I stood in the laundry room folding towels while she spoke. The washing machine hummed softly behind me. That sounds lovely, I answered evenly. Daniel feels terrible about how awkward things became at Ethan's birthday, she continued. You know how family misunderstandings happen. Misunderstanding. Another carefully chosen word. People like Vanessa wrapped cruelty inside pleasant language the way department stores wrap fragile items in tissue paper. The damage still existed underneath. Of course, I said calmly. I am sure none of it was intentional. Vanessa relaxed immediately hearing that. I could almost picture her smiling. Exactly. I told Daniel you would understand. Understand what? That they had already discussed selling my home before I was even gone. That my grief had become a business opportunity? But I said none of those things. Arthur had been right about one detail above all others. They expected emotion. Anger. Hurt. Guilt. They did not expect patience. After we hung up, I finished folding the towels carefully and carried them upstairs. The hallway smelled faintly of cedarwood and old books. Arthur's side of the closet remained untouched except for the suits I donated after the funeral. Some mornings I still reached for him automatically before remembering emptiness has no shape to hold on to. That evening I sat alone on the back porch wrapped in a wool blanket while cold wind moved across the lake. The water looked dark blue beneath the setting sun. Arthur built this porch himself during the summer Daniel turned 12. I remembered the sound of hammering, the smell of sawdust. Daniel carrying crooked boards proudly because he wanted to help his father. Families do not collapse all at once. They erode quietly, one compromise at a time. One selfish decision explained away until eventually strangers were the faces of your children. On Friday morning, I met Margaret again. This time the conversation was shorter, cleaner, more strategic. We reviewed the trust documents carefully while rain tapped softly against the office windows. If pressure escalates, Margaret explained, the survivorship clause activates automatically once coercive intent is documented. I studied the legal language spread across the desk between us. Documented how. Margaret adjusted her glasses slightly. Witnesses. Written communication. Recorded financial requests. Attempts to isolate you emotionally or manipulate major decisions. I thought immediately about Sunday dinner. Vanessa never invited people without a reason. What if they asked me directly to transfer the house? Margaret's expression remained calm. Then you listen carefully. I nodded slowly. No dramatic speeches. No confrontation. Just listening. Sometimes the quietest person in the room learns the most. Before leaving, Margaret handed me a slim black folder. Keep these with you, she said. Just in case. I placed the folder carefully inside my purse beside Arthur's letter. Driving home through the rain, I realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, I was no longer afraid of losing my family. Because somewhere between the birthday toast and the legal documents, I had finally accepted a painful truth. The family I had spent decades protecting no longer existed. What remained was performance, obligation, calculation. And by Sunday night, I suspected they were finally going to show me exactly how far that calculation reached. Sunday evening arrived cold and gray. The kind of October weather that makes tree branches look brittle against the sky. I drove to Daniel and Vanessa's house just before 6, carrying a pumpkin pie from the bakery Ethan liked near Main Street. The neighborhood looked polished as always. Wide driveways, trimmed hedges, expensive SUVs parked beside basketball hoops no children seemed to use anymore. Vanessa opened the front door before I reached it fully, smiling too quickly. Helen, you made it. She kissed the air beside my cheek without touching me. The scent of vanilla candles drifted through the hallway behind her. Everything inside the house looked staged for a magazine photograph. Soft music playing. Candles lit along the dining room shelves. White serving dishes arranged perfectly across the kitchen island. Vanessa loved appearances because appearances distracted people from motives. Grandma. Ethan ran toward me wearing socks across the hardwood floor before Vanessa reminded him not to slide. He hugged me tightly anyway. I held him for a second longer than usual. Children still love honestly before adults teach them calculation. Daniel appeared from the kitchen carrying a bottle of wine. Hey, Mom. He sounded overly cheerful. Careful. Like a man rehearsing normal behavior. I handed Ethan the pie box while Daniel offered to take my coat. You look good, he said casually. I almost smiled at the irony. People often compliment you right before asking for something. Dinner moved politely at first. Roasted chicken, wild rice, green beans with almonds. Vanessa described school fundraisers while Daniel discussed interest rates and housing prices far too often for a casual conversation. I listened quietly while sipping water from a crystal glass identical to the set I once gave them for their wedding anniversary. Across the table, Olivia barely touched her food. Twice I caught her glancing nervously between her parents and me. She knew something was coming. Eventually, Vanessa leaned back in her chair and folded her napkin carefully beside her plate. Actually, she said brightly, there is something Daniel and I wanted to discuss with you. There it was. The room seemed to tighten slightly around the edges. Even Ethan looked up from his mashed potatoes. Daniel cleared his throat. Mom, we have been worried about you living alone out at the lake house. Concern. Always concern. That was the costume people wore when greed needed better manners. The winters are harsh, Vanessa added quickly. And honestly, that property is huge for one person. I nodded slowly without speaking. Silence made nervous people talk more. Daniel continued. We found this beautiful active adult community about 15 minutes from us. Maintenance-free living. Security. Social events. Vanessa smiled warmly. There is even a wellness center. Wellness center. Another polished phrase. I looked down briefly at the folded napkin resting beside my plate. Arthur once told me real manipulation rarely sounds cruel at first. It sounds reasonable. That is thoughtful, I said softly. Relief flickered across Daniel's face too quickly. Vanessa leaned forward slightly. We just think simplifying things would take so much pressure off you emotionally. Then came the sentence they had truly invited me there to hear. And of course, Daniel added carefully, selling the lake property now would be financially smart while the market is high. I lifted my eyes slowly toward him. My son could not hold my gaze for more than 2 seconds. Outside the dining room windows, darkness had fully settled across the neighborhood. Reflections from the chandeliers shimmered against the glass like ghosts floating above the backyard. You already spoke with a realtor, I said quietly. It was not a question. Vanessa's smile faltered for half a heartbeat before recovering. Just informational conversations. Informational. Another pretty word hiding ugly intentions. Ethan looked confused now. But Grandma loves her house. Silence fell heavily across the table. Daniel reached for his wine glass, while Vanessa laughed softly. Sweetheart, sometimes older people need help making practical decisions. Older people. Not Helen. Not your grandmother. Just older people. Easier to move someone emotionally once you stop speaking about them like a person. I looked around the table slowly. The expensive dishes. The rehearsed concern. The careful language. Suddenly I realized something almost amusing. They truly believed I would surrender quietly because grief had made me fragile. They had mistaken loneliness for weakness, and that misunderstanding was about to become very expensive for them. Vanessa recovered first. People like her usually do. The moment discomfort enters a room, they rush to smooth it over before anyone examines where it came from. She laughed softly and reached for the wine bottle again. Nobody is forcing you into anything, Helen, she said sweetly. We are just trying to think ahead as a family. Family. There was that word again. Carefully polished. Conveniently flexible. Daniel nodded beside her. We only want what is best for you, Mom. I looked at him quietly for a long moment. He shifted in his chair almost immediately. When Daniel was little, he used to confess things before being asked because guilt sat visibly on him. Apparently, some parts of childhood never fully disappear. Olivia finally spoke for the first time all evening. Grandma takes care of herself perfectly fine. Vanessa's smile tightened. Olivia, adults are talking. The words landed harder than she intended. Olivia lowered her eyes to her plate, but I saw the hurt move across her face. Vanessa noticed it too and immediately softened her tone. Honey, nobody is saying Grandma cannot take care of herself. Then she turned back toward me with practiced concern. We just know grief can make big houses overwhelming. I folded my hands carefully in my lap beneath the table. Arthur used to say manipulation often sounds most reasonable when witnesses are present. That way cruelty can disguise itself as concern if anyone objects later. Ethan looked between everyone nervously before whispering, I like Grandma's house. Daniel forced a smile toward his son. It is not about liking the house, buddy. It is about practicality. Practicality. Another cold little word dressed like wisdom. I watched Vanessa reach for Daniel's arm gently while she spoke. Small gestures. Strategic gestures. The performance of unity. Honestly, she continued softly, the property taxes alone on waterfront homes are becoming ridiculous. There it was again. Not grief. Not safety. Money. Every conversation eventually circled back to money. I took a slow sip of water while letting silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. You seem very informed about my finances, I said calmly. Vanessa blinked once. Daniel answered too quickly. Mom, come on. We are just trying to plan responsibly. I almost admired how rehearsed they sounded. They had clearly discussed this conversation beforehand, probably several times. The dining room candles flickered softly between us, while dishes cooled untouched on the table. Outside, rain had started tapping lightly against the windows. A perfect suburban family dinner. From the outside. Inside, a negotiation disguised as concern. Then Vanessa leaned forward slightly and crossed a line she could not uncross. The truth is, she said gently, families usually transition these things before a crisis happens. Crisis. Such a small word for what she truly meant. I felt something inside me settle completely still. Not sadness anymore. Certainty. What kind of crisis? I asked quietly. Vanessa exchanged the briefest glance with Daniel before answering. Memory issues. Isolation. Confusion. Older people can become vulnerable without realizing it. Older people. Again, never me directly. Always categories. Easier to strip dignity from someone once you stop speaking to them like an individual human being. Olivia looked horrified now. Mom. Just that one word. Sharp with embarrassment. Vanessa ignored her completely. We would never let anything happen to you. Helen, she said warmly. That is why it makes sense to organize things while you are still thinking clearly. The room went silent after that. Even Daniel looked uncomfortable hearing the sentence spoken out loud. I set my water glass down carefully beside my plate. Crystal touched wood with a soft click. While I am still thinking clearly, I repeated. Vanessa smiled carefully now, realizing perhaps she had revealed too much too quickly. You know what I mean. Yes, I finally did. They were not merely hoping I would volunteer the house someday. They were preparing a narrative. One where concern justified control. One where grief became incompetence. One where my own hesitation could someday be used as proof that I needed management instead of respect. Arthur saw this coming long before I did. And sitting there beneath warm dining room lights while my daughter-in-law smiled across the table like a woman already redecorating my home in her imagination, I realized Sunday dinner had never been an invitation. It was an evaluation. No one spoke for several seconds after that. Rain continued sliding softly down the dining room windows while the candles burned lower between us. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sensing tension children are never supposed to understand. Olivia stared directly at Vanessa now with open disbelief. Daniel rubbed one hand against the side of his wine glass without looking at me. I realized then that he had probably convinced himself this conversation was kindness. People sleep better when they rename selfishness into responsibility. Vanessa finally smiled again, smaller this time. Controlled. We are only trying to avoid difficult situations later. I nodded slowly. Of course. My calmness unsettled them more than anger would have. I could see it clearly now. Vanessa expected resistance she could label emotional. Daniel expected guilt he could manage. Instead, I sat quietly beneath the warm dining room lights looking at them with complete composure. Arthur always said the most dangerous person in any negotiation is the one who no longer needs approval. Actually, I said gently, there is something I should probably share with both of you. Vanessa straightened slightly in her chair. Daniel finally looked up at me directly. I reached beside my chair for my handbag and removed the slim black folder Margaret had given me Friday morning. The movement alone changed the energy in the room. Vanessa's smile faded almost invisibly. Daniel watched the folder carefully. I placed it on the table between the serving dishes and folded my hands over it for a moment before speaking again. Arthur updated several legal protections before he passed away. Daniel blinked once. Protections? Yes. My voice remained calm. Even. Specifically regarding the lake house, family trust assets, and inheritance conditions. Vanessa glanced toward Daniel quickly. Very quickly. Small reactions reveal the truth faster than words ever do. Helen, she said lightly, nobody is talking about inheritance. I looked directly at her for the first time all evening. You discussed property values at Ethan's birthday lunch before dessert was served. Silence again. Heavier now. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. Mom, you are misunderstanding. No, I interrupted softly. I finally understand perfectly. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far across the lake. The sound vibrated faintly through the windows. I opened the folder carefully and removed a single document. Margaret had highlighted one paragraph in pale yellow. I slid the paper across the table toward Daniel. He read the first few lines silently before color drained slowly from his face. Vanessa leaned closer immediately. What is that? She asked sharply. Daniel did not answer. His eyes kept moving across the page. Daniel. Vanessa's voice tightened now. Finally, he swallowed hard and looked at me. Mom. The words sounded smaller than usual. Weaker. Arthur included a survivorship clause. I explained calmly. Any attempt to pressure, manipulate, or coerce me regarding financial decisions automatically removes the involved beneficiary from inheritance eligibility. Vanessa stared at me openly now. Gone was the polished warmth. Gone was the careful suburban performance. For one brief second, her real expression appeared underneath. Shock first, then calculation, then fear. That is ridiculous, she said quickly. Nobody is coercing you. I tilted my head slightly. You invited me to dinner to discuss selling my home and questioning my mental clarity. We were concerned about you, Vanessa snapped. Concern does not usually begin with conversations about property taxes and realtors, I answered quietly. Daniel closed the folder slowly, like touching it longer might somehow worsen the damage already done. Across the table, Olivia looked down at her lap, hiding what I suspected was relief. Ethan remained confused, glancing between everyone nervously. Poor child. Adults poison rooms children should feel safe inside. Vanessa leaned forward suddenly. So what now? You are threatening your own family with legal paperwork. Threatening. Interesting choice of words from someone who had spent months planning my surrender. I rose slowly from my chair and picked up my purse. No dramatic speech. No raised voice. Just movement. Calm movement. No, Vanessa, I said softly. Arthur simply believed respect should never require legal protection inside a family. Unfortunately, He prepared for the possibility anyway. Daniel stood halfway, as if unsure whether to stop me. Mom, wait. I looked at my son carefully. Really looked at him. The tired eyes. The nervous posture. The man who once brought me dandelions wrapped in napkins before life taught him greed could wear expensive clothing and call itself practicality. You should have come to me honestly, I said. That would have cost you far less. I left while the rain was still falling steadily against the sidewalks outside. No one followed me immediately. Behind my back, I heard only silence and the faint clink of silverware against plates nobody wanted to finish anymore. Vanessa had finally run out of polished phrases. Daniel had run out of explanations. Some truths empty a room, even when everyone remained sitting inside it. I walked calmly through the front hallway while fastening my coat one button at a time. Family photographs lined the walls beside me. Vacation pictures, Christmas mornings, school graduations, smiling faces frozen inside frames, while something colder quietly grew underneath all those years. Ethan suddenly appeared beside the staircase before I reached the front door. Grandma, he asked softly. I turned immediately. His small face looked worried in the soft hallway light. Children always notice more than adults realize. I bent slightly and touched his cheek gently. Everything is all right, sweetheart. Are you mad? The question nearly broke my heart because children blame themselves whenever adults poison the air around them. No, I answered honestly. Just disappointed. He hugged me tightly around the waist. For one brief moment, I closed my eyes and held him close, breathing in the scent of laundry soap and birthday cake frosting still lingering faintly in his sweater. Innocence, the only honest thing left in that house. Then Olivia appeared quietly behind him. Our eyes met for a second. She understood more than anyone else there. I gave the smallest nod. Thank you. She nodded back. Daniel finally stepped into the hallway, looking pale beneath the warm overhead lights. Mom, he said quietly, can we talk tomorrow? I studied him for a long moment. Rainwater dripped softly from the edge of my umbrella onto the hardwood floor near the door. You should talk to yourself first, I said gently. Vanessa remained in the dining room behind. Him, arms folded tightly now, her expression hard and unreadable. The performance was over. No more careful smiles. No more concern disguised as kindness. Just anger that the plan had failed before it even fully began. I opened the front door and cold air rushed inside immediately. The storm smelled like wet leaves and distant lake water. For the first time in months, breathing felt easy again. Not because I had won something. Because I had finally stopped begging silently to be loved correctly by people determined to misunderstand my value. Driving home through the rain, I passed familiar streets glowing beneath yellow streetlights. Small diners closing for the night. Gas stations reflecting puddles beneath neon signs. Ordinary life continuing exactly as it always does after private heartbreak. But something inside me had changed permanently. Grief no longer sat on my shoulders like exhaustion. It had become clarity. When I reached the lake house, the porch light glowed warmly against the darkness. Arthur used to leave it on whenever I drove anywhere at night, because he said nobody should come home to darkness alone. I stood inside the quiet foyer listening to the grandfather clock echo softly through the house. The same house Vanessa had already mentally sold. The same home Daniel called impractical. I removed my coat slowly and looked out across the lake through the tall front windows. Rain rippled gently across the water beneath the moonlight. Arthur had protected this place because he understood something I had forgotten after his death. Kindness without boundaries invites entitlement. Love without self-respect becomes permission. Earlier that week, I thought losing my family would destroy me. Standing there in the silence of my own home, I realized something unexpected instead. What truly destroys people is spending years shrinking themselves to fit inside relationships that no longer honor them. My phone buzzed once inside my purse. A message from Daniel. I did not open it. Not that night. Maybe not ever. Instead, I walked toward the kitchen and placed Arthur's letter back inside the drawer beside his reading glasses. Then I turned off the downstairs lights one room at a time before heading upstairs slowly, listening to the storm move across the lake outside my windows. And for the first time since my husband died, I no longer felt abandoned inside my own life. I felt free.